My name is Sarah. 3 years ago, I thought I had it all, a perfect love story with Lucas, my fiancé, the kind you only read about in romance novels. We were inseparable, dreaming of a life together filled with love and laughter. But life unraveled faster than I could grasp, plunging me into a storm of heartbreak, betrayal, and impossible choices. This isn't just a story about love, it's about what happens when everything you believed in shatters, and you're left picking up the pieces, trying to find yourself again. My name is Sarah. If you had met me 3 years ago, you'd have encountered someone who genuinely believed she had won life's lottery. I was engaged to Lucas, the love of my life, my best friend, my everything. Our story felt like something out of a Nicholas Sparks novel, complete with sunsets, shared secrets, and promises whispered in the dark. It was a crisp September afternoon when we first met at a small coffee shop in Santa Monica. I was rushing to finish some edits for a client, seated at a corner table with my laptop, my drink growing cold. Lucas was the stranger who accidentally spilled his latte on my notebook as he squeezed past me. His apologies were as frantic as they were genuine, but what caught me was his smile, bright, warm, and just a little self-deprecating. We ended up talking for hours, and by the time the cafe closed, I knew this was someone I wanted to see again. Our relationship grew quickly, fueled by a natural ease we had with each other. Lucas had this way of making every moment special, even the simplest ones. One night, just a few months into dating, he showed up unannounced outside my tiny Pasadena apartment with a pizza, a bottle of wine, and a blanket. "We're having a rooftop picnic," he declared, grinning. I laughed, thinking he was joking, but he wasn't. We climbed up the fire escape, and under the stars, with the hum of the city below, we talked about everything, our dreams, our fears, and the lives we hoped to build. When he proposed, it was the perfect blend of spontaneity and romance that only Lucas could pull off. It was during a weekend trip to Big Sur, where we'd rented a cozy cabin overlooking the rugged coastline. That Saturday, we spent the day hiking through redwoods, the air filled with the scent of pine and salt from the ocean. As the sun began to set, we sat on a cliffside, watching the sky shift from orange to deep purple. Lucas pulled out a small, weathered journal, something I'd seen him scribbling in often, but had never dared to peek at. "I've been writing about us," he said, his voice steady, but tinged with vulnerability. He handed me the journal, and as I flipped through, I realized it was filled with little notes about our time together, the date of our first kiss, the day we got caught in the rain and ended up dancing like fools in the parking lot of a diner, and even the moment he said he realized he loved me. On the final page were the words, "Will you marry me?" Before I could fully process the question, he pulled out a ring, a simple but elegant band with a single diamond, and waited. Tears streamed down my face as I said yes. The engagement period felt like a dream. We spent weekends scouting wedding venues, sampling cakes, and debating over the playlist for our reception. Lucas was determined to have our song, Frank Sinatra's "The Way You Look Tonight," as our first dance. "It's classic, just like us," he'd joke. But beyond the big moments, it was the small, quiet times that made me feel truly lucky. Like the nights we spent curled up on the couch, binge-watching our favorite shows, or Sunday mornings when we'd linger over breakfast, talking about everything from politics to the latest sci-fi movie he was obsessed with. Lucas had this uncanny ability to make even the mundane feel magical. Lucas and I had only been engaged for a few months, still riding the high of planning our future together. Every conversation we had seemed to circle back to wedding venues, honeymoon ideas, or even picking out the perfect little house in Santa Monica where we could begin our lives as husband and wife. We weren't married yet, but we were inseparable. In every way that mattered, Lucas felt like my partner for life. He was the golden boy of his family, kind-hearted, brilliant, and, perhaps most notably, the eldest son of a wealthy and influential dynasty. The Ramseys were Napa Valley royalty, thanks to the empire his father, Richard, had built. They owned sprawling vineyards, luxury properties, and, of course, a name that carried weight in the business world. But wealth like that always comes with strings attached. Lucas had shared stories with me about the tension in his family, especially after his father remarried. Vivian, his stepmother, was a striking woman, elegant and polished, with a presence that could fill any room she walked into. But there was something unsettling about her, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. I'll never forget the first time I met her. Lucas had insisted on introducing me to his family during a weekend trip to the estate in Napa. It was late spring, and the vineyard was alive with the scent of blooming lavender and freshly turned soil. Vivian greeted us at the front steps, dressed impeccably in a crisp white blouse and tailored trousers, her hair swept into a perfect chignon. "So, you're the fiancé," she said, her tone as smooth as silk, but lacking any real warmth. "You're certainly unexpected." I smiled politely, ignoring the sting of her words. "It's nice to meet you, Mrs. Ramsey." "Call me Vivian," she replied, her lips curving into a smile that felt more like a warning than a welcome. That weekend was filled with thinly veiled jabs and moments where I felt like an outsider looking in. At one point, as Lucas and I walked through the vineyard, he tried to reassure me. "Don't let her get to you," he said, squeezing my hand. "Vivian's always been territorial." "Territorial?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. Lucas sighed. "Let's just say she doesn't like competition. My dad left everything to me in his will, something she's never fully accepted." As it turned out, the reading of Richard's will had thrown the family into chaos. Lucas had inherited the majority of the estate, while Vivian was left with a generous, but comparatively smaller, portion. She was furious, contesting the will with the kind of tenacity that only someone like Vivian could muster. The weeks that followed were tense. Lucas was pulled into endless meetings with lawyers, trying to defend his father's final wishes. Vivian, meanwhile, seemed to grow more desperate with each passing day. Then came the night everything changed. It was a chilly October evening. Lucas had spent the day in San Francisco meeting with the family attorney, trying to find a resolution to the ongoing dispute. He called me on his way home, his voice a mixture of exhaustion and optimism. "I think we're finally making progress," he said. "It's not over yet, but I can see the light at the end of the tunnel." "That's great news," I replied, relieved to hear some positivity in his voice. "Drive safe, okay?" "It's getting late." "I will," he promised. "I love you, Sarah." "I love you too," I said, smiling to myself as I imagined him walking through the door and pulling me into one of his warm, reassuring hugs. But that moment never came. A few hours later, I was woken by the shrill ring of my phone. Groggy and disoriented, I answered without checking the caller ID. "Miss Harper?" a deep, unfamiliar voice asked. "Yes, this is Sarah," I replied, sitting up in bed. "This is Officer Morales with the California Highway Patrol. I'm very sorry to inform you that your fiancé, Lucas Ramsey, was involved in a fatal car accident tonight. He was struck head-on by a truck on Highway 101. He didn't survive the impact." The words hit me like a physical blow. "What?" I whispered, my voice trembling. "No, there must be some mistake. Lucas was just on his way home." "I'm very sorry, ma'am," the officer said, his tone gentle but firm. "The accident occurred about an hour ago. The driver of the other vehicle is in custody, but your fiancé was pronounced dead at the scene. I don't remember much of what happened next." I dropped the phone, my hands trembling as waves of disbelief and anguish crashed over me. The room seemed to spin, and I collapsed onto the floor, clutching my chest as if the pain could somehow be eased by holding myself together. The hours that followed were a blur of phone calls, tears, and numb disbelief. Friends and family tried to comfort me, but their words felt like empty echoes in a hollow room. All I wanted was Lucas. As the days turned into weeks, the initial shock gave way to a gnawing sense of suspicion. The truck driver who had killed Lucas had a history of DUIs, a man who should never have been behind the wheel. And then there was Vivian. Her behavior at the funeral was almost too composed, too calculated. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Lucas's death than met the eye. In the months after losing Lucas, I felt like I was living in a fog, existing, but not really alive. Every corner of my apartment was a painful reminder of him, the half-finished puzzle we'd started on the coffee table, the collection of postcards from places we dreamed of visiting, even the faint scent of his cologne lingering in the closet. I withdrew from the world, barely answering calls, and only leaving the house when absolutely necessary. But there was one person who never gave up on me, Nathan. Nathan and I had been friends long before Lucas came into my life. We met during our college years at UCLA, in a crowded lecture hall where we both struggled through statistics. Nathan was the type of guy who could make anyone laugh, and his sense of humor quickly turned study sessions into moments I actually looked forward to. Even after we graduated, he remained a constant presence in my life, always dependable, always kind. When I met Lucas, Nathan was genuinely happy for me. He even helped Lucas plan the proposal, something I only learned after the fact. Nathan and Lucas had become friends, which made his support after Lucas's death feel both comforting and complicated. Summer eventually rolled around, bringing long days and warm evenings that seemed to mock the cold emptiness I felt inside. Nathan made it his mission to coax me out of the house, whether it was for coffee, a walk in the park, or just sitting on a bench watching people pass by. He never pressured me to talk about Lucas, but he was always ready to listen when I did. One particularly hot evening in late July, Nathan convinced me to join him for a drive out to Lake Tahoe. "It's too beautiful out to stay cooped up," he said. I resisted at first, but eventually gave in, letting him drag me out of my bubble. We arrived just as the sun was starting to dip below the horizon, the sky painted in hues of orange and pink. Nathan spread out a blanket on the shore, pulling out a cooler stocked with my favorite snacks. We sat in comfortable silence, the gentle lapping of the water providing a soothing backdrop. As the last rays of sunlight sparkled on the lake, Nathan reached into his bag and pulled out a bouquet of white daisies, my favorite flower. "I saw these and thought of you," he said, handing them to me with a sheepish smile. I took the bouquet, my throat tightening. "Thank you," I whispered. Nathan cleared his throat, suddenly looking nervous. "Sarah, there's something I need to say. And I need you to hear me out, okay?" I nodded, unsure of where this was going. "I know Lucas will always have a place in your heart," he began, his voice steady but soft. "And I don't want to replace that. I could never replace that. But I also know that life doesn't stop because of loss. I want to be here for you, to help you build something new. If you'll let me." "Nathan," I started, but he held up a hand to stop me. "Just let me finish," he said, shifting to sit directly in front of me. "I've loved you for a long time, Sarah. Longer than I ever admitted, even to myself. I don't want to rush you or push you into anything you're not ready for. But I want you to know that I'm here. And I'm not going anywhere." Tears welled up in my eyes. "I don't know if I'm ready," I admitted, my voice trembling. Nathan gave me a small smile. "That's okay," he said. "I'll wait. For as long as it takes." Then, to my shock, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. Opening it, he revealed a simple yet elegant ring that glinted in the fading sunlight. "But while I wait, I need you to know how serious I am about this," he continued. "Sarah Harper, will you give me the chance to love you for the rest of our lives?" I stared at him, my heart pounding. It wasn't that I didn't care for Nathan, I did. He had been my rock through the hardest time of my life. But the thought of moving on, of opening myself up to someone else, felt like a betrayal to Lucas. Nathan seemed to sense my hesitation. "You don't have to answer now," he said gently. "Take your time. Just know that this is real. I'm here, Sarah. Always." Tears spilled down my cheeks, and I couldn't stop them. For a long moment, I sat there, holding the ring box in one hand and the daisies in the other. Finally, I looked up at him, overwhelmed by the depth of his sincerity. "Nathan, you've done so much for me," I said, my voice shaking. "I don't know if I deserve this." "You do," he said simply. And in that moment, something shifted. It wasn't that my grief disappeared, it would always be a part of me. But for the first time in what felt like forever, I saw a glimmer of hope, a possibility for happiness that I thought was lost forever. After what felt like an eternity, I nodded. Okay, I whispered. Nathan's face broke into a smile, and he pulled me into a hug, holding me like I was the most precious thing in the world. That night, under the stars and the whisper of the lake's waves, I began to believe that maybe, just maybe, life could be beautiful again. Life has a way of surprising you when you least expect it. By the time a full year had passed since losing Lucas, I had started to come to terms with my new reality. Nathan had become a steady presence in my life, and though I still carried the ache of Lucas's absence, I had begun to find joy in small things again, walks in the park, baking on lazy Sunday mornings, or simply curling up with a good book. It was a rainy Thursday afternoon in early November when everything changed. The kind of rain that soaks through even the best umbrella and turns the city into a gray, reflective blur. I had taken the day off work to deep clean my apartment, something I hadn't done in far too long. I was in old sweatpants, my hair tied up in a messy bun, humming along to a playlist of 90s hits while scrubbing the kitchen counters. Then the doorbell rang. At first, I thought it was a delivery driver dropping off something Nathan had ordered. But when I opened the door, my heart stopped. Standing there, drenched from head to toe, was Lucas. His clothes clung to his thin frame, and his face was gaunt, almost unrecognizable. But it was him, those eyes, that unmistakable way he said my name. "Sarah," he rasped, his voice hoarse and trembling. "I'm home." I didn't know if I was dreaming or hallucinating. I stood frozen for a moment, gripping the door frame as my brain tried to catch up with what my heart already knew. Then, without thinking, I threw myself into his arms, sobbing uncontrollably. His body was warm, his arms weak but still so familiar as they wrapped around me. How are you here?" I choked out, pulling back just enough to look into his face. Lucas gave me a faint smile, one that didn't quite reach his eyes. "It's a long story," he said, stepping into the apartment as I closed the door behind him. I grabbed a blanket from the couch and wrapped it around his shoulders, guiding him to sit down. "Lucas, we thought you were gone." "Everyone thought." I couldn't finish the sentence. He nodded, his expression heavy with pain. "I know. That night, the accident. It wasn't just an accident, Sarah. Someone hit me on purpose. They wanted me out of the way." "What?" I gasped, my mind racing. He took a deep breath, his hands shaking as he reached for the cup of tea I had placed in front of him. "After the crash, I didn't die. I was badly injured, but someone pulled me from the wreck before the paramedics got there. I was taken somewhere remote. They kept me there, whoever they are, isolated, hidden. I don't even know where I was for most of it." I sat there, stunned, trying to process his words. "Why would someone do this to you?" Lucas's face darkened. "It's about inheritance, Sarah. The will, the estate, everything. I don't know all the details, but I know this was about power and control. They wanted to eliminate me without causing too much attention." My mind immediately went to Vivian, his stepmother. She had always seemed capable of anything to get her way. But this was beyond anything I could have imagined. "How did you get out?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Lucas's eyes softened, and for the first time, I saw a glimmer of the man I knew. "It took months, Sarah. I waited for a chance, a slip in their routine, a moment when they let their guard down. And when it came, I ran. I ran until I couldn't anymore. Eventually, someone found me, a truck driver passing through a small town miles away from here. They helped me get to a hospital, and as soon as I was strong enough, I came straight back to you." Tears streamed down my face as I listened. "Lucas, I can't believe this. I thought you were gone forever." "I thought so too," he admitted, reaching out to take my hand. "But the thought of you kept me going. I knew I had to make it back to you. At that moment, the weight of the past year hit me like a tidal wave. The grief, the longing, the slow process of trying to move forward, all of it seemed to collapse under the sheer joy of having Lucas back. But along with that joy came a flood of questions. What would this mean for the life I had started rebuilding? For Nathan? For everything that had changed since Lucas had been gone? As I sat there, holding Lucas's hand and trying to wrap my head around the impossible, one thing was clear: this was only the beginning of a new chapter, one I hadn't seen coming. When Lucas came back, I thought it would make everything clear, that his return would wipe away the uncertainty and pain I had felt in the year since he'd been gone. But life is rarely that simple. Instead of clarity, I found myself caught in a whirlwind of emotions, facing a choice I never expected to have to make. I loved Lucas. That was undeniable. He was my first great love, the one who made me believe in forever. But in the year he was missing, Nathan had become my lifeline. He wasn't just a friend who stepped in when I was at my lowest, he was my everything. He had held me together when I was falling apart, brought me back to life when I felt like I had nothing left to live for. The night Lucas returned, after the shock had worn off and the initial tears had dried, we sat in my living room, just the two of us. The rain was still falling outside, the rhythmic patter against the windows the only sound between us. I need you to know something, Lucas said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. I'm not angry at you for moving on. I can't be. I know what it must have looked like, what it must have felt like for you. But Sarah, I'm here now. And I still love you. I've never stopped loving you. Tears welled up in my eyes again as he spoke. Lucas, He cut me off gently, shaking his head. You don't have to say anything right now. I just need you to know how I feel. I'll wait for you, for however long it takes. If there's even a part of you that still wants us, I'll fight for that part. The next day, I knew I had to talk to Nathan. I couldn't leave him in the dark, it wouldn't have been fair. He came over that evening, bringing takeout from the Thai place down the street, just like he always did when he knew I needed comfort. When I opened the door, his face lit up with that familiar, warm smile. But when he saw the look on my face, the smile faded. What's wrong? He asked, his voice immediately filled with concern. Come in, I said softly, stepping aside to let him in. We sat down on the couch, the food untouched on the coffee table between us. I couldn't bring myself to meet his eyes as I told him about Lucas, about how he wasn't really gone, about how he was back. For a long moment, Nathan didn't say anything. Then, quietly, he said, I always knew there was a part of you that would always belong to him. And I understood that. But now that he's back, he trailed off, his voice breaking slightly. Sarah, I love you. I love you more than I ever thought it was possible to love someone. But I can't be the guy you settle for because you feel guilty about letting him go. That wouldn't be fair to either of us. Nathan, it's not like that, I insisted, my own voice shaking. You're not a replacement. You never were. He reached out and took my hand, his eyes filled with both love and pain. Then tell me this, if you had to choose, right now, who would it be? I froze. How could I possibly answer that? Lucas was my past, my first love, the man I had dreamed of marrying. But Nathan was my present, my safe haven, the man who had pieced me back together when I was broken. How could I compare the two? I don't know, I admitted, tears streaming down my face. I don't know how to choose. Nathan nodded, his jaw tightening as he processed my words. I can't make this decision for you, Sarah. But you need to figure it out, for your sake, for Lucas's, and for mine. In the days that followed, I found myself torn in ways I hadn't thought possible. Lucas and I began spending time together, trying to pick up the pieces of what we had lost. He told me more about the ordeal he had been through, about the isolation and the fear, and how the thought of me had kept him going. I dreamed about this, he told me one evening as we walked through the park. The leaves were beginning to turn, painting the world in shades of gold and crimson. About coming home to you, about us being together again. It was the only thing that kept me sane. His words stirred something deep inside me, an ache for the life we had planned, for the future we had lost. But at the same time, I couldn't ignore the bond one had built with Nathan, the way he had become such an integral part of my life. Nathan, true to his word, gave me space. But I could see the pain in his eyes every time we talked. One evening, he came by to pick up some things he had left at my place, and as he stood in the doorway, he looked at me with a mixture of love and resignation. "Sarah, I hope you find what you're looking for," he said quietly. "And I hope it makes you happy, whatever it is. But please, promise me one thing, don't make this decision out of guilt. Make it because it's what you really want." As I stood there, watching him walk away, I realized just how much I stood to lose, no matter what I chose. Lucas was my first love, the man who had shaped so much of who I was. But Nathan was the one who had shown me that love could be gentle and steady, even in the face of heartbreak. I was caught between two men, two loves, two lives. And for the first time in my life, I didn't know where my heart truly belonged. It's hard to explain the chaos that overtook my heart during those weeks. Every emotion I had seemed to collide in a confusing swirl. I loved Lucas. I had never stopped loving him. But my relationship with Nathan wasn't something I could just ignore or walk away from. He had been my anchor, my steadying force during the darkest time of my life. Lucas understood this. He never pushed me or tried to make me feel guilty, but he also made it clear that he wasn't ready to let me go. One evening, after days of avoiding his calls, I finally agreed to meet him. "We need to talk, Sarah," he had said over the phone, his voice calm but insistent. "Not to pressure you, just to work through everything." We decided to meet at his apartment downtown, a place he had rented after escaping the nightmare of his captivity. It was a modest one-bedroom on the 15th floor of a high-rise, with large windows that overlooked the city. The view was stunning, the kind of glittering cityscape that felt almost too perfect to be real. That night, the city lights reflected off the glass, casting soft patterns on the walls. Lucas and I sat side by the window, the sounds of traffic humming faintly in the background. For a moment, neither of us spoke. I stared at the skyline, trying to gather my thoughts, while Lucas traced small circles on the back of my hand with his thumb. "I don't blame you for anything," Lucas said finally, breaking the silence. His voice was low, almost a whisper. "I can't imagine what it was like for you, thinking I was gone. But I need you to know something. I'm still the same man who loves you, who wants to build a life with you. That hasn't changed." I looked down at our hands, his fingers laced with mine. "Lucas," I said, my voice trembling, "I don't know what to do. I can't ignore what we had, what we meant to each other. But Nathan saved me when I couldn't save myself. He's good to me. He's good for me." Lucas nodded, his jaw tightening. "I understand that. And I'll never try to take away the fact that he was there for you. But Sarah," he paused, searching for the right words. "I can't lose you again. I don't want to. Let me prove to you that what we have is worth fighting for." The sincerity in his voice brought tears to my eyes. He lifted my hand and pressed a gentle kiss to my knuckles, a gesture so familiar that it sent a pang of longing through my chest. Over the next few weeks, Lucas and I began meeting in secret. It wasn't something I felt good about, but I wasn't ready to bring these complicated feelings into the open. Most of our conversations happened at his apartment, late at night after I had finished work or spent time with Nathan. One evening, Lucas had cooked dinner for us, a simple pasta dish with a bottle of wine he had picked up from a small vineyard near the coast. We ate at the small table near his window, the city lights sparkling behind us. "Do you remember our trip to Napa?" he asked, a soft smile playing on his lips. I nodded, my mind drifting back to the memory. It had been one of our favorite weekends, a last-minute getaway to escape the chaos of wedding planning. We had spent the days biking through the vineyards, sampling wines, and laughing over the most ridiculous things. You were so mad when that waiter spilled red wine on your white dress, Lucas said, chuckling. But you handled it so gracefully. I thought, that's the kind of person I want by my side forever. I smiled, tears welling up in my eyes again. I remember thinking the same thing about you when you tried to mop it up with your tie. The nostalgia hit me like a tidal wave, pulling me back to a time when things were simpler, clearer. But as much as I wanted to lose myself in those memories, the present kept intruding. I'm scared, I admitted, my voice barely audible. Of what? Lucas asked gently. Of hurting Nathan, I said. He doesn't deserve that. He's been nothing but kind and patient with me. Lucas leaned back in his chair, his expression serious. I don't want to hurt him either, Sarah. But you have to ask yourself, what do you really want? Not what you think is right, not what you think will make everyone else happy. What do you want? I didn't have an answer. Or maybe I did, and I was too afraid to say it out loud. A few days later, Lucas asked me to meet him at a small cafe on the outskirts of the city. It was a quiet spot, nestled in a tree-lined street where the buzz of downtown seemed a world away. The sun was beginning to set, casting a golden glow through the large bay windows. When I arrived, Lucas was already seated at a corner table, his face unusually tense as he sipped from a steaming mug. Hey, I said softly, sliding into the chair across from him. He looked up, his eyes meeting mine, and for a moment, he didn't say anything. There was something in his gaze that made my stomach twist, an intensity, a heaviness that I wasn't used to seeing. Sarah, he began, his voice low and measured. There's something I need to tell you. Something I should have told you sooner. I frowned, my heart beginning to race. What is it? Lucas leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. It's about Vivian. My stepmother. What about her? I asked, my unease growing. She knows I'm alive, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. And she's not happy about it. But it's not just me she's targeting anymore. She's been keeping tabs on you too. I froze, his words sinking in like a stone in water. What do you mean she's been keeping tabs on me? Why would she care about me? Because you're my weakness, Lucas said, his tone laced with regret. She thinks if she can use you, threaten you, it'll keep me in line. Or worse, make me disappear again for good. I stared at him, my mind racing. Lucas, this doesn't make any sense. Why would she go to such lengths? I thought this was about the inheritance. It is, he said, his expression darkening. But it's also about control. Vivian doesn't just want the money, she wants the power that comes with it. She sees me as a threat to that, and now she sees you as collateral damage. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The idea of being watched, of being a pawn in Vivian's twisted game, was almost too much to process. How do you know this? I asked, my voice shaking. Lucas hesitated, running a hand through his hair. After I escaped, I started digging into what happened, who was behind my kidnapping, why it happened. I've been piecing it together slowly, and everything points back to her. She has people working for her, private investigators, maybe even worse. They've been following you, Sarah. The blood drained from my face. Following me? Since when? I'm not sure, Lucas admitted, his frustration evident. But I've noticed them a few times. A car parked near your apartment for hours, someone shadowing you when you're out running errands. It's subtle, but it's there. I felt a chill run down my spine, my mind flashing back to moments I hadn't thought twice about, a black SUV I'd seen parked on my street more than once, the feeling of being watched when I went to the grocery store. At the time, I had dismissed it as paranoia. Now, I wasn't so sure. What do we do? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Lucas reached across the table and took my hand, his grip firm but reassuring. We stay careful, he said. And we stay together. I won't let anything happen to you, Sarah. I promise. His words were meant to comfort me, but they only added to the weight on my chest. This wasn't just about my feelings for Lucas and Nathan anymore. This was about something much bigger, something far more dangerous than I had ever anticipated. As we left the cafe that evening, Lucas insisted on driving me home. The air between us was heavy, the reality of the situation settling in like a storm cloud. "Do you really think she'd hurt me?" I asked as we pulled up to my apartment. Lucas hesitated, his jaw tightening. "I think Vivian is capable of anything if it means getting what she wants. But as long as I'm here, she won't touch you." "I won't let her." I nodded, though his words did little to ease my fear. As I stepped out of the car and walked to my door, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching. The streetlights cast long shadows across the sidewalk, and every sound seemed amplified in the quiet night. Once inside, I locked the door behind me and leaned against it, my mind racing. I thought about calling Nathan, about telling him everything Lucas had just told me. But I hesitated. Would he understand? Would he think this was just another excuse to justify my feelings for Lucas? The next morning, I woke up to find a bouquet of flowers on my doorstep. There was no note, no indication of who had left them. The sight of them, so out of place and unexpected, sent a shiver down my spine. Was it a gesture of kindness? Or a warning? For the first time in my life, I felt truly unsafe. And I knew that whatever decision I made, Lucas or Nathan, past or present, would have consequences far beyond my own heart. I should have seen it coming. The tension between Lucas and Nathan had been building like storm clouds for weeks, and it was only a matter of time before it all erupted. But I never expected it to come to this, a confrontation in the middle of nowhere, where everything I thought I knew would be thrown into question. Nathan called me earlier that day, his voice sharp and unyielding. "We need to settle this, Sarah. I've set up a meeting with Lucas. He and I are going to have it out, once and for all." "What are you talking about?" I demanded, panic rising in my chest. "Nathan, this isn't the way to handle things." "Maybe not for you," he said. "But for me, it's the only way. Meet me at the old factory site on Route 9 at 6. I tried to argue, to reason with him, but he hung up before I could say more. Frustrated and scared, I texted Lucas, pleading with him not to go. But his reply came swiftly and decisively. "I'll be there." It's time this ends. By the time I arrived at the desolate factory site, the sun was dipping low in the sky, casting long shadows over the cracked asphalt and resting structures. Lucas was already there, standing near an old loading dock with his hands in his pockets. His face was calm, but his eyes burned with a quiet intensity that made my stomach churn. Nathan pulled up moments later, stepping out of his truck with an energy I'd never seen in him before. His usual composed demeanor was gone, replaced by something raw and unfiltered. "This is ridiculous," I said, stepping between them as Nathan approached. "We don't need to do this. Please, let's just go home and talk like adults." But Nathan wasn't listening. He marched straight toward Lucas, his voice rising with each step. "Lucas, you think you can just waltz back into her life and take her away from me? Do you have any idea what she's been through? What I've been through while you were gone?" Lucas held his ground, his expression unwavering. "Nathan, I don't want to fight you. This isn't about me or you, it's about Sarah. If she chooses you, I'll walk away. But she deserves to make that choice without being manipulated." Nathan let out a bitter laugh. "Manipulated? That's rich, coming from you." He pulled his phone from his pocket, his hands shaking slightly as he navigated to a video. "Sarah, you need to see this," he said, his voice laced with anger and hurt. I hesitated, my heart pounding as he thrust the phone toward me. The screen lit up with a grainy video, and my breath caught in my throat. It showed Lucas standing in a dimly lit alley, handing a stack of cash to a man I didn't recognize. "Sarah," Nathan said, his voice trembling with rage, "this is your perfect Lucas. He wasn't kidnapped, he staged the whole thing to escape Vivian and come back to you. He played all of us. I felt the blood drain from my face as I looked at Lucas. Is this true? I whispered, my voice barely audible. No, Lucas said firmly, his eyes locked on mine. That's not what this is. I paid that man to get information about the people who held me. I was trying to find out who was behind everything, to protect you. Protect me? I repeated, my voice rising. How am I supposed to know who to believe, Lucas? This video, what Nathan's saying, it makes sense. Does it? Lucas shot back, his calm exterior beginning to crack. He turned to Nathan, his voice sharp. And where exactly did you get this video, Nathan? Who gave it to you? Nathan hesitated, his eyes darting away for a moment. Does it matter? He said finally. The truth is the truth. It matters, Lucas said, his tone cold. Because if you got this from Vivian or one of her people, then you're being played just as much as Sarah is. The air between them grew thick with tension, and I felt like I was suffocating. Both of them were staring at me now, each waiting for me to say something, to make some kind of judgment. But I couldn't. My mind was spinning, my heart caught between two versions of the truth. I don't know who to believe, I said finally, my voice cracking as tears filled my eyes. Both of you seem to be hiding things from me, and I can't handle this right now. Sarah, listen to me, Lucas said, stepping closer. I would never lie to you about something like this. I love you. Everything I've done has been for you. And what about me? Nathan said, his voice breaking. I've been here for you through everything. I've been honest with you from the start. Can you really just throw that away for him? I felt like I was being pulled in two directions, each one tearing at a different piece of my heart. And in that moment, I realized that no matter what I chose, someone was going to get hurt. I need time, I said finally, my voice barely a whisper. I need time to figure out what's real and what's not. Neither of them argued, though the tension between them remained palpable. As I turned and walked away from the confrontation, I felt the weight of their eyes on my back. This wasn't just about love anymore. This was about trust, about safety, about uncovering the truth in a web of lies and half-truths. And I didn't know if my heart, or my mind, was strong enough to face what I might find. The weeks after the confrontation at the factory were heavy with silence. Nathan became more distant, and when we did speak, there was a sharpness to his tone that hadn't been there before. He wasn't angry in the way I had expected, not loud or outwardly hostile. Instead, there was a quiet intensity about him, a coldness that felt even more unsettling. I didn't know then that Nathan was spiraling, consumed by his frustration and jealousy. While I tried to process my own feelings, Nathan had already made up his mind. He wasn't going to lose me, no matter what it took. Unbeknownst to me, Nathan had hired a private investigator to dig into Lucas's past. What the investigator uncovered shocked even him. Lucas, in a desperate attempt to escape his captors after the staged accident, had made a deal with them. They would let him go, and in return, he promised never to reveal their identities or the details of their operation. It wasn't clean, but it was a choice made under unimaginable pressure. Nathan saw this as his chance to destroy Lucas for good. But instead of going to the police, he went a step further. He tracked down the same group that had taken Lucas and convinced them to help him send a message. With a mixture of threats and money, Nathan set his plan into motion. The night everything fell apart was one I'll never forget. It was late, and I was just settling into bed when my phone buzzed with a text from Lucas. Heading home now. Talk tomorrow? I sent back a quick, good night. Be safe, not thinking much of it. But an hour later, my phone rang. It was Lucas, his voice panicked and breathless. Sarah, I need you to stay inside. Lock your doors. Something's going on. What's happening? I asked, fear creeping into my voice. I don't know, he said. There were guys waiting for me outside my building. I barely got away. I think they were trying to. His words were cut off by the sound of commotion on his end. Lucas? I shouted into the phone, but the line had gone dead. I grabbed my keys and rushed out the door, against my better judgment. I knew I should have called the police right away, but all I could think about was finding Lucas. When I got to his apartment, the scene was chaos. Two men in masks were dragging Lucas toward a van parked on the curb. "Stop!" I screamed, running toward them. But before I could get too close, one of them turned and grabbed me, pinning my arms behind my back. "Lucas!" I shouted, struggling against the man's grip. Lucas fought back, landing a punch that sent one of the attackers sprawling to the ground. But then the unexpected happened. Nathan appeared out of nowhere, his voice booming. "Let her go." For a brief moment, I thought Nathan had come to save us. He charged toward the men, shoving the one holding me aside and pulling me to safety. But there was something off about his demeanor, something calculated. The men hesitated, looking at each other, before retreating into the van and speeding off. Nathan turned to me, his hands on my shoulders. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice soft but urgent. I nodded, still too shaken to speak. Lucas stumbled over to us, his face bruised but determined. "What are you doing here, Nathan?" he demanded. "I was driving by and saw what was happening," Nathan said smoothly. "What does it look like I'm doing?" "I saved her." But Lucas wasn't buying it. "Driving by? At this time of night? And right here?" Before Nathan could respond, the sound of sirens filled the air. Someone must have called the police, and within minutes, officers were swarming the scene. The two masked men didn't get far. They were caught less than a mile away, and when the police brought them back to the scene, it didn't take long for the truth to unravel. Under pressure, one of the men confessed that they had been hired, not to kill Lucas, but to rough him up. "Hired by who?" one of the officers asked. The man hesitated, then nodded toward Nathan. "Him." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. I turned to Nathan, my heart sinking. "Is that true?" I asked, my voice trembling. Nathan's face went pale, and for a moment, he said nothing. Then, finally, he whispered, "I didn't mean for it to go this far." The officers moved in, cuffing him as I stood frozen in place. "Sarah," Nathan said, looking at me with tears in his eyes. "I'm sorry. I couldn't lose you." Nathan's trial was swift. The evidence against him was damning, and there was no way to justify what he had done. I attended every court session, my heart breaking a little more each time I saw him in the defendant's seat, his shoulders hunched and his eyes downcast. On the final day, just before the verdict was read, Nathan finally looked at me. "I'm sorry for everything," he said, his voice barely audible. "For hurting you, for ruining everything. But I need you to know, I never stopped loving you, Sarah." Tears streamed down my face as the judge handed down his sentence. Nathan was led away in handcuffs, and I knew I would never see him again. Lucas stayed by my side during those dark days, helping me pick up the pieces of my shattered world. But even with his support, a part of me felt hollow. Nathan's actions were unforgivable, but I couldn't forget the man he had been, the man who had once loved me with everything he had. I learned that love, even at its purest, can become twisted when consumed by fear and desperation. Nathan had lost everything, his freedom, his reputation, and the chance at a future with me. And while I knew I couldn't save him, I couldn't stop mourning the part of him that had been good. Some scars never fully heal. Just when I thought the chaos was behind me, Vivian returned like a storm I couldn't avoid. I had begun to settle into a new sense of normalcy, tentative, fragile, but real. Nathan's trial was over, and Lucas and I were slowly rebuilding our connection. But Vivian, as always, had other plans. It started with a phone call early one morning, when the sunlight was just starting to filter through the blinds in my apartment. I almost didn't answer. Her name flashing on the screen sent a chill down my spine. but curiosity got the better of me. "Hello?" I said cautiously. "Sarah," came her smooth, controlled voice. "It's Vivian. We need to talk." "Vivian, I have nothing to say to you," I replied, my grip tightening on the phone. "You might want to reconsider," she said, her tone sharp but calm. "This isn't just about you. Meet me at the Rosewood Cafe at 11. I suggest you don't keep me waiting." I considered ignoring her, but something in her voice left me uneasy. Against my better judgment, I found myself walking into the cafe later that morning. It was a high-end spot in a quiet neighborhood, a place where every table had pristine white linens, and the air was filled with the aroma of freshly brewed espresso. Vivian was already there, seated at a corner table with her back to the wall. She looked different from the polished, powerful woman I remembered. Her hair was tied back in a severe bun, and her eyes, usually filled with calculated confidence, seemed colder, more detached. "Sarah," she said as I approached, gesturing to the seat across from her. "Thank you for coming." "I'm not here because I wanted to be," I said, sitting down but keeping my posture stiff. "What do you want?" Vivian leaned back in her chair, her lips curving into a faint, humorless smile. "Straight to the point. I suppose I should expect that from you by now." I crossed my arms, waiting for her to get to the reason she had dragged me here. "You've become quite the fixture in Lucas's life," she said, her tone almost conversational. "I have to admit, I underestimated your resilience." I narrowed my eyes. "What are you getting at, Vivian?" Her smile faded, replaced by a colder expression. She reached into her leather bag and pulled out a slim folder, placing it on the table between us. "This," she said simply. I stared at the folder, dread coiling in my stomach. Slowly, I reached for it and opened it. Inside were documents, photographs, and what looked like emails, evidence of a deal Lucas had made during his captivity. The papers detailed a contract in which Lucas had agreed to relinquish his rights to a significant portion of his inheritance in exchange for his release. My heart sank as I flipped through the pages. "What is this?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "This," Vivian said, her voice dripping with satisfaction, "is proof that Lucas isn't the victim he's made himself out to be. He made a deal, Sarah. A deal that could land him in serious trouble if it ever came to light." I looked up at her, my mind racing. "Why are you showing me this?" "What do you want?" Vivian leaned forward, her eyes locking onto mine. "I want you to leave Lucas. Walk away from him and everything he's trying to rebuild. If you don't, I'll make sure this information is made public. And believe me, it won't just ruin him, it'll ruin you too." My chest tightened. "You're threatening me?" "I'm giving you a choice," she said coolly. "Lucas might think he's escaped me, but I always find a way to get what I want. You're smart enough to see that, aren't you?" I sat back in my chair, my thoughts a tangled mess. Part of me wanted to call her bluff, to walk out and tell Lucas everything. But another part of me couldn't ignore the weight of what she was holding over us. "Why do you hate him so much?" I asked, my voice trembling. Vivian's expression hardened. "Hate? This isn't about hate, Sarah. It's about control. Lucas thinks he can defy me, that he can take what's mine and get away with it. But no one crosses me without consequences." I shook my head, feeling a mix of anger and despair. "You don't own him, Vivian. He's not something you can control." Her lips curled into a bitter smile. "That's where you're wrong. Everyone has a weakness, Sarah. Even you." I stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the polished floor. "I'm done with this," I said, my voice shaking. "You can play your games, but I won't let you drag us down with you." Vivian remained seated, her calm demeanor unshaken. "Think carefully, Sarah. If you choose to stay, you'll be dragging Lucas into a fight he can't win." "Can you live with that?" I didn't respond. I turned and walked out of the cafe, my heart pounding in my chest. The fresh air outside did little to calm me. I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, and every decision I made would either pull me back to safety or send me plummeting into chaos. When I got home, Lucas was waiting for me. The moment he saw my face, his expression shifted to concern. "What's wrong?" he asked, stepping toward me. I hesitated, the folder still clutched in my hand. "Lucas," I said softly, "we need to talk." Starting over wasn't something I had planned for, but it became the only choice that made sense. After everything, Nathan's obsession, Lucas's secrets, Vivian's threats, I realized that the life I was living wasn't really mine anymore. It was tangled in a web of betrayal, manipulation, and heartbreak, and I couldn't see a way forward with either man. It wasn't an easy decision. Walking away from Nathan and Lucas felt like cutting out pieces of my heart. Nathan had been my rock when I thought I'd lost everything. He'd show me kindness and stability in a way I never thought possible, but that love had turned into something darker, something possessive that I couldn't reconcile with the man I had once trusted so deeply. Lucas was my first great love, the one who taught me what it meant to feel truly alive. But the past year had revealed cracks in the foundation I thought was unshakable. The secrets he kept, even if made out of desperation, were too much for me to overlook. And Vivian's threats were a constant reminder that his life came with a weight I wasn't sure I could carry. So, one cold morning in December, I packed up my apartment and drove away. I didn't leave a forwarding address or a detailed explanation. I needed space to breathe, to think, to figure out who I was without the chaos of the last few years defining me. I ended up in a small town in Oregon, a place nestled between towering pines and misty mountains. It wasn't glamorous, but it was quiet, and that was exactly what I needed. I found a tiny rental house on the outskirts of town, with peeling paint and a yard overrun by wildflowers. It wasn't much, but it felt like a blank slate. The first few weeks were the hardest. I spent most of my time unpacking, rearranging furniture, and avoiding the quiet moments when my thoughts would creep in. Memories of Lucas and Nathan haunted me, the way Lucas used to hold my hand during long drives, the way Nathan would bring me coffee on Sunday mornings, always remembering how I liked it. I'd lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, replaying everything that had happened. Could I have done things differently? Was there a way to salvage what we had without losing myself in the process? These questions swirled in my mind, unanswered and relentless. As time passed, the ache began to dull. I threw myself into small projects, painting the living room, planting a garden, volunteering at the local library. The town was welcoming in its own quiet way. My neighbors, a retired couple named Jim and Martha, would invite me over for coffee and pie, their warmth reminding me that not all connections come with strings attached. But even as I started to rebuild, a part of me felt like I was living in the shadow of my past. On particularly tough days, I'd find myself staring at my phone, wondering if I should call Nathan or Lucas. I'd never saved their numbers, but they were burned into my memory. I never did call, though. I couldn't bring myself to open that door again, not when I was just beginning to feel whole. One rainy afternoon, as I sat on the porch watching the mist roll in over the mountains, I found myself reflecting on a question that had been lingering in my mind since I left. Could I ever truly escape the shadows of the love I'd known, or would they follow me forever? The answer wasn't clear. Maybe it never would be. Love, for all its beauty, leaves marks, some we cherish, and some we wish we could erase. For now, all I could do was keep moving forward, one step at a time. I didn't know where the road would lead, but for the first time in a long time, it felt like it was mine to choose.